They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but nobody told me it could be served from beyond the grave. The rain hammered against the cracked windows of the abandoned house as I stood in what used to be my grandmother's living room, my hands trembling around a letter that would change everything. Behind me, the floorboards creaked ominously as if the house itself was trying to tell me something. Something my dead grandmother had hidden for 30 years. My husband was gone. My sister had taken everything. But as I read those yellowed pages by the light of my phone's flashlight, I realized that sometimes the greatest victories come to those who appear to have lost it all. The house around me wasn't rotting. It was waiting. Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge tales of life. Enjoy listening. 3 months earlier, I sat in the lawyer's office wearing my only good dress, the black one I'd worn to Grandma Rose's funeral just a week before. The fabric was starting to pill at the elbows, but it was all I had left that looked respectable. My sister Victoria glided in 20 minutes late, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown to my doom. She looked perfect as always. Her blonde hair was styled in those effortless waves that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and her cream-colored blazer probably cost more than my car. When she sat down, she didn't even look at me. Just pulled out her phone and started scrolling through what I assumed were congratulations messages about her latest promotion. "Sorry I'm late," she said without a trace of actual apology in her voice. Traffic was insane coming from downtown. I wanted to tell her that maybe if she'd left her penthouse apartment 5 minutes earlier, she wouldn't have been late to our grandmother's will reading. But I bit my tongue. I always bit my tongue when it came to Victoria. Mr. Hartwell, Grandma's ancient lawyer, cleared his throat and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. The man looked like he'd been practicing law since the Constitution was signed, and his office smelled like old leather and disappointment. "Ladies, thank you for coming." Rose Montgomery was very specific about how she wanted her estate divided. He opened a thick folder and pulled out several documents. "Victoria, as the elder granddaughter, you inherit the 3-bedroom apartment on Riverside Drive, along with all furnishings, jewelry, and the contents of her savings account, approximately $340,000. My heart sank, but I tried to keep my face neutral. Of course. Victoria got the apartment I'd grown up visiting every weekend, the place where Grandma had taught me to bake cookies and told me stories about our family. The apartment where I'd spent more time than Victoria ever had, because she was always too busy with her career and her perfect life. And Iris," Mr. Hartwell continued, and I looked up hopefully. Maybe there was something left for me. Maybe Grandma hadn't forgotten about me entirely. "You inherit the family house in Millbrook Village, along with all its contents and the surrounding 2 acres of land." Victoria snorted. "The old dump in the middle of nowhere? Grandma, you really saved the best for last, didn't you?" She was talking to the ceiling as if Grandma could hear her sarcasm from beyond the grave. My face burned with humiliation. The house in Millbrook Village was falling apart. I'd been there exactly once when I was 12, and even then it had been more ruin than residence. No running water, holes in the roof, and surrounded by nothing but fields and abandoned farms. It was worthless. "There's one more thing," Mr. Hartwell said and handed me a sealed envelope. "Rose specifically requested that Iris receive this letter, to be opened only when you first enter the Millbrook property." Victoria rolled her eyes. "Probably instructions on how to tear it down safely." She stood up, smoothing down her skirt. "Well, this was fun. Iris, if you need help hauling junk to the dump, let me know. I might be able to recommend a good company." She left without even saying goodbye, leaving me sitting there with my envelope and my inheritance that felt more like a cruel joke. I should have known something was wrong when I came home that evening and found my husband Trevor packing his suitcase. Not just throwing clothes in a bag for a business trip. Really packing. With the kind of careful folding and organization that spoke of permanence. "Going somewhere?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light despite the dread that was settling in my stomach like a stone. Trevor didn't look up from his methodical packing. We'd been married for 8 years and I knew all his expressions. This was his difficult conversation face. The same one he wore when he had to fire employees or negotiate difficult contracts. "We need to talk," he said, and those 4 words hit me like a physical blow. I sat down heavily on our bed. Our bed that we'd picked out together at a furniture store during our second year of marriage, debating thread counts and firmness levels like they were the most important decisions in the world. The irony wasn't lost on me that he was now packing to leave from the very bed we'd chosen together. I've been doing some thinking, Trevor continued, and I don't think this marriage is working out. What do you mean it's not working out? The words came out sharper than I intended, but I felt like I was drowning. Trevor, we just inherited a house. We could fix it up, maybe use it as a vacation home or... Iris. He finally looked at me and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger or sadness, but something worse. Pity. You inherited a shack in the middle of nowhere. Victoria got a luxury apartment in the city center and enough money to live comfortably for years. Do you see the difference? So this is about money? This is about ambition. This is about having a future. He zipped up his suitcase with a finality that made my chest tight. Victoria has direction. She has goals. She's going places. The room started spinning slightly. Victoria? What does my sister have to do with this? Trevor sat down next to me on the bed, but he didn't touch me. In 8 years of marriage, he'd never sat this close to me without touching me, holding my hand, putting his arm around me. Something. The space between us felt like an ocean. Victoria and I have been talking, he said carefully. She's offered me a position at her marketing firm. Senior partner, starting immediately. It's everything I've been working toward. And she needs someone she can trust. Someone who understands her vision. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to tell me this was some elaborate joke. But his face remained serious, almost businesslike. Trevor, she's my sister. I know that. And I know this is difficult. But Iris, look at yourself. Really look. He gestured vaguely at me and I became suddenly aware of my appearance. My hair was in a messy bun because I hadn't had time to style it before the lawyer's appointment. My good dress was wrinkled from sitting in the lawyer's office. My shoes were scuffed. You've given up, he continued. You work at that little bookstore making barely above minimum wage. You come home tired every day and watch Netflix until you fall asleep. When was the last time you had a real ambition? When was the last time you wanted something more? Each word felt like a slap. Because the terrible thing was he wasn't entirely wrong. I had been coasting. I had been comfortable in our small life. But I thought he'd been comfortable too. I wanted us, I whispered. I thought that was enough. It's not enough for me anymore. He stood up and grabbed his suitcase handle. Victoria's picking me up in 20 minutes. I'll send for the rest of my things later. Victoria's picking you up? The betrayal hit me in waves. First the realization that they'd been talking behind my back. Then the understanding that they'd planned this whole conversation. And finally, the crushing knowledge that my husband was leaving me for my sister. It's not like that, Trevor said quickly, seeing the look on my face. It's not romantic. It's business. But I could see the lie in his eyes. Maybe it had started as business. Maybe they'd convinced themselves it was just professional. But I knew my sister and I knew that look on Trevor's face. She'd gotten her claws into him the same way she'd gotten everything else she'd ever wanted. 8 years, I said, more to myself than to him. I'm sorry, Iris. I really am. But I can't keep pretending that this is the life I want. He walked toward the door, then turned back. You'll be fine. You've got your grandmother's house. Maybe a fresh start is exactly what you need. He left me sitting on our bed in our apartment that I wouldn't be able to afford on my own, staring at the empty closet space where his clothes used to hang. 20 minutes later, I watched from our bedroom window as Victoria's red BMW pulled up outside our building. Trevor walked out with his suitcase and his laptop bag, moving with the quick, efficient steps of someone who couldn't wait to start his new life. Victoria got out of the car to help him with his bags, and even from 3 floors up I could see her smile. The same smile she'd given me in the lawyer's office when she'd found out about my inheritance. The smile that said she'd won again. As they drove away together, I realized that my grandmother's house in Millbrook Village wasn't just my inheritance. It was my only option. I spent the next week in a haze of practical arrangements that felt like planning my own funeral. Giving notice at the bookstore where I'd worked for 5 years. Breaking the lease on the apartment Trevor and I had shared. Selling furniture I couldn't take with me to buy a used truck capable of making the 2-hour drive to Millbrook Village. The truck was a 15-year-old Ford with rust spots and a radio that only picked up AM stations, but it was mine. The first thing I'd owned outright since my college textbooks. There was something liberating about that, even if the liberation came wrapped in complete life collapse. The drive to Millbrook took me through increasingly rural landscape. First the suburbs gave way to small towns, then the small towns gave way to farmland, then the farmland gave way to something that looked like it had been abandoned by time itself. Empty fields stretched to the horizon, broken only by the occasional derelict barn or farmhouse with broken windows staring out like dead eyes. I'd called ahead to have the electricity turned on, but the phone company told me service to that address had been disconnected for over 20 years. No cell towers either. I was driving into what felt like another century. The GPS on my phone lost signal about 10 miles before Millbrook Village, leaving me to navigate by the hand-drawn map Mr. Hartwell had provided. Turn left at the dead oak tree. Continue past the abandoned gas station. When you see the stone bridge, you've gone too far. Millbrook Village turned out to be a generous description for what was essentially 3 buildings and a stop sign. There was a post office that looked like it had been closed since the Clinton administration, a general store with newspapers in the window that were yellow with age, and a diner that might have served food sometime in the 1990s. The house was 2 miles past the village, down a dirt road that seemed to exist mainly as a suggestion. My truck bounced and rattled over potholes that could have swallowed small cars, and tree branches scraped against the windows like fingernails on glass. When I finally saw it, I almost drove past without stopping. The house squatted in the middle of an overgrown field like something out of a horror movie. The roof sagged in the middle, and several of the windows were boarded up with plywood that had weathered to a gray that matched the storm clouds gathering overhead. The front porch tilted at an angle that suggested the foundation had given up trying to support it years ago. But it was mine. For better or worse, it was the only thing in the world that belonged to me. I parked the truck and sat for a moment listening to the engine tick as it cooled. There were no other sounds. No traffic, no neighbors, no signs of human life for miles in any direction. Just the whisper of wind through the tall grass and the distant rumble of thunder. The front door was painted red, though most of the paint had peeled away to reveal gray wood underneath. The key Mr. Hartwell had given me was old-fashioned, the kind that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. It took some wiggling, but the lock finally turned. The door swung open with a creak that echoed through the empty house like a warning. The smell hit me first, not decay as I'd expected, but something else. Lavender and lemon oil, as if someone had been cleaning recently. The floorboards groaned under my feet, but they felt solid despite their age. I fumbled for a light switch and was surprised when an overhead bulb flickered to life, casting warm yellow light across what had once been a living room. The furniture was covered in white sheets, giving everything the appearance of a museum exhibit or a room frozen in time. I pulled the sheet off the nearest chair and discovered a beautiful antique armchair in deep burgundy velvet, its wooden legs carved with intricate vine patterns. Not what I'd expected to find in a house I'd been told was worthless. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and when I looked closer I realized they were full. Not with the moldy paperbacks I'd expected, but with leather-bound volumes that looked like they belonged in a university library. History books, literature, scientific journals dating back decades. There was a massive stone fireplace dominating one wall, and above the mantel hung a portrait I'd never seen before. It showed a woman who looked remarkably like me. Same dark hair, same green eyes, same stubborn jawline. But she was dressed in clothing from the 1940s, and there was something in her expression that spoke of secrets and strength. I remembered my grandmother's letter and pulled it out of my jacket pocket. The envelope was yellowed with age and sealed with red wax that bore the impression of a rose. My hands shook slightly as I broke the seal. My dearest Iris, if you're reading this, then Victoria has gotten exactly what she expected, and you have received what everyone believes to be the consolation prize. I imagine you're feeling betrayed right now, perhaps even by me. But I need you to understand something. I gave Victoria what she could see, and I gave you what she could not. The house you're standing in has been in our family for 4 generations. It was built by your great-great-grandfather in 1923, not as a farmhouse but as a sanctuary. Our family has always attracted those who would take advantage of our gifts, and this house was meant to be a place where we could retreat and plan and become who we were truly meant to be. Victoria has always been able to take care of herself. She has the kind of strength that the world recognizes and rewards. But you, my dear girl, have a different kind of strength. The kind that comes from endurance, from watching, from understanding people in ways they don't understand themselves. The house may look abandoned, but it's been maintained. There's a trust that pays for utilities and upkeep, money Victoria knows nothing about because she never bothered to learn our family history. You'll find everything you need in the house, including some things that may surprise you. But most importantly, you'll find the answers to questions you didn't even know you should be asking. Go to the basement. Behind the wine rack you'll find a door. That's where your real inheritance begins. With love and faith in who you're becoming, Grandmother Rose. Victoria always assumed I liked her best because she was successful. The truth is, I was preparing her to be exactly what she became, someone who would take the bait and leave the trap for someone smarter. I read the letter 3 times before the full implications sank in. A basement. A hidden door. A trust fund I'd never heard of. And the unsettling suggestion that my grandmother had orchestrated this entire situation. Thunder rumbled overhead, closer now, and rain began pattering against the windows. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into my pocket, then went looking for the basement stairs. I found the basement door behind the kitchen, hidden behind a curtain that had seemed purely decorative. The stairs were wooden but solid, and motion sensor lights flickered on as I descended into what I'd expected to be a typical basement. Concrete walls. Maybe some stored Christmas decorations, the usual underground dampness. Instead, I found something that took my breath away. The basement was finished like an underground study. Persian rugs covered polished hardwood floors. Built-in shelves lined the walls, filled with more books, but also with filing cabinets, photo albums, and what looked like decades of carefully organized documents. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, and behind it was indeed a wine rack. But not the kind you'd find in a suburban home. This wine rack was built into the wall and stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with bottles that looked like they'd been aging for decades. But when I examined it more closely, I could see that it was mounted on hinges. A hidden door, just as my grandmother's letter had promised. It took me several minutes to figure out the mechanism, but eventually I discovered that removing one specific bottle triggered a release that allowed the entire rack to swing inward, revealing a narrow room beyond. What I found in that hidden room made me sit down heavily in my grandmother's desk chair. The room was an office, but not just any office. This was the office of someone who had made it her business to know things. Filing cabinets lined 3 walls, each drawer meticulously labeled with dates and names. A computer, newer than anything else in the house, hummed quietly on a small desk. And covering the 4th wall was what could only be described as a conspiracy theorist's dream. A massive corkboard covered with photographs, documents, newspaper clippings, and colored string connecting various pieces of information. But this wasn't the work of someone chasing imaginary connections. As I got closer and began reading, I realized that my grandmother had spent decades documenting the lives and business dealings of people in our city. Politicians, business owners, social leaders, anyone with power and influence. And she hadn't just been collecting information randomly. She'd been building cases. I pulled down one of the files at random and found myself looking at a folder labeled Theodore Ashworth, City Planning Commission. Inside were dozens of documents, photographs of Ashworth meeting with construction company executives, copies of bank records showing payments that didn't match his city salary, recorded conversations about zoning decisions being made in exchange for cash payments. Another file contained evidence that Judge Morgan had been taking bribes to influence custody decisions. Another documented a network of doctors who were prescribing unnecessary surgeries to boost their income. My grandmother had been running some kind of one-woman investigation operation for 30 years, and from what I could see, she'd never acted on any of the information. She just collected it, organized it, and waited. On the desk next to the computer was a handwritten note in my grandmother's careful script. Iris, the files are organized chronologically. Start with the most recent and work backwards. Everything you need to know about how to use this information is in the computer. The password is your birthday, month, day, year, no spaces. Trust your instincts. Trust your anger. And remember that sometimes the best revenge is simply giving people the truth they thought they could bury. Pose. I turned on the computer and entered my birthday. The desktop that appeared was organized with military precision. Folders labeled active cases, pending investigation, evidence archives, and distribution networks. But the folder that caught my attention was labeled Victoria and Associates. With trembling fingers I clicked it open. The file on my sister was massive, easily 3 times larger than any of the others I'd glimpsed. It started with her early career and went right up to the present day, documenting a pattern of behavior that made my stomach turn. Victoria hadn't just been successful in marketing. She'd been systematically destroying her competition through corporate espionage, stealing clients through industrial sabotage, and sleeping her way through the upper management of every company she'd ever worked for. But she'd been careful about it. Smart. She'd never left enough evidence for anyone to build a case against her. Anyone except my grandmother, apparently. The file contained photographs of Victoria entering hotel rooms with married executives. Recorded phone conversations where she discussed stealing proprietary information from competing firms. Bank records showing payments from shell companies that could be traced back to her rivals' business losses. But the section that made me feel sick was the one about Trevor. According to my grandmother's notes, Victoria had been cultivating Trevor for over 2 years. She'd started by accidentally running into him at business conferences. Then casual drinks to catch up and discuss my career concerns. Then longer conversations about his frustrations with his current job and his ambitions for the future. She'd played him like a violin and he'd never even realized it was happening. There were photos of them together at restaurants across town, always somewhere I'd never go, always when I thought Trevor was working late or attending client meetings. The file showed a timeline of their relationship that made it clear this hadn't been a sudden decision or a moment of weakness. Victoria had planned this. She'd identified Trevor as a useful asset, determined that taking him from me would serve her purposes, and executed a 2-year campaign to make it happen. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the reason behind it. According to a recorded phone conversation between Victoria and her business partner, she hadn't wanted Trevor for romance. She'd wanted him because she knew it would destroy me. Because she'd always resented that our grandmother seemed to favor me, and she'd wanted to make sure I had nothing left when the inheritance was divided. Iris has always been the family favorite, Victoria's voice said through the computer speakers, tinny but unmistakably hers. Rose always made time for her little projects and her quiet personality. But favorites don't mean anything in the real world. I want her to understand that being sweet and thoughtful gets you nothing. Taking Trevor will break her completely, and when she's broken, she'll disappear. Maybe move away, maybe just fade into the background where she belongs. Either way, she won't be around to make me look bad anymore. I listened to that recording 3 times, my hands clenched into fists so tight that my nails drew blood from my palms. My sister hadn't just stolen my husband. She'd set out to destroy my entire life as a deliberate strategy to ensure I wouldn't be a problem for her anymore. But as I sat in my grandmother's hidden office, surrounded by 30 years of carefully gathered secrets, I realized something that Victoria had never considered. I wasn't broken. I was free. Free from a marriage to a man who could be so easily manipulated. Free from trying to compete with a sister who saw life as a zero-sum game. Free from pretending that family meant something to people who viewed love as a weakness to be exploited. And I wasn't defenseless. I had enough evidence to destroy Victoria's career, her reputation, and her future. I had documentation of crimes that could put her in prison. I had the power to take everything from her the same way she'd taken everything from me. But as I explored more of my grandmother's files, I realized she'd left me something even better than evidence of Victoria's crimes. She'd left me the tools to give Victoria exactly what she deserved. The computer contained detailed instructions for something my grandmother had called the network. A carefully cultivated group of contacts in journalism, law enforcement, and business who had been waiting for years to receive the information she'd been gathering. According to her notes, she'd spent decades building relationships with people who had the power to act on her evidence but who needed rock-solid documentation before they could move. Reporters who specialized in exposing corruption. FBI agents who investigated white-collar crime. Prosecutors who had built their careers on taking down people who thought they were untouchable. But she'd never pulled the trigger on any of it. She'd been waiting for the right moment, the right circumstances, the right person to carry out what she'd started. She'd been waiting for me. The computer contained draft emails addressed to dozens of recipients, all pre-written and ready to send. Each one was customized to appeal to the specific interests and specialties of the person receiving it. The investigative journalist would get evidence of corruption in city government. The federal prosecutor would receive documentation of tax evasion and money laundering. The civil rights lawyer would get proof of discriminatory practices in housing and hiring. And Victoria's file would go to all of them, along with evidence showing how her business practices were connected to a broader network of corporate crime that stretched across the region. But as I read through my grandmother's strategy, I realized she'd built something even more elegant than a simple information dump. She'd designed a coordinated attack that would unfold over the course of several weeks, with each revelation building on the last, making it impossible for Victoria or any of her associates to contain the damage or control the narrative. By the time Victoria realized what was happening, it would be too late for damage control. The first wave would be business journalists receiving evidence of insider trading and corporate sabotage. Victoria would wake up to headlines questioning her business practices, but nothing she couldn't potentially weather with good lawyers and public relations management. The second wave would be federal investigators receiving evidence of tax evasion and fraud. While Victoria was dealing with reporters, she'd suddenly find herself facing IRS audits and FBI inquiries that would freeze her assets and make it impossible for her to operate normally. The third wave would be local prosecutors receiving evidence of criminal activity that would result in actual charges being filed. By this point, Victoria would be financially paralyzed and facing serious jail time. And the final wave would be social media accounts and gossip bloggers receiving the personal information, the photos, the recorded conversations, the evidence of her systematic destruction of personal relationships. This would destroy her reputation beyond any possibility of recovery. It was brilliant. It was comprehensive. And it was absolutely devastating. But as I sat in that underground office, surrounded by evidence of my grandmother's careful planning, I realized there was something else I needed to do first. I needed to make sure Trevor understood exactly what he'd gotten himself into. The next morning, I drove back to town using a different route that took me past Victoria's building. Her red BMW was parked in its assigned spot, and when I looked up at her floor, I could see lights on in what I knew was her apartment. I parked across the street and called Trevor's cell phone. He answered on the third ring, sounding slightly out of breath. "Iris? Is everything okay?" "I'm fine. I wanted to talk to you about dividing some of our things. There are a few items I'd like to keep that have sentimental value." "Of course. That's very reasonable of you." He sounded relieved that I wasn't calling to beg him to come back or to scream at him about Victoria. "What did you have in mind? Could we meet for coffee? Somewhere neutral? I promise I'm not going to make a scene." There was a pause while he considered this. "Hey, how about that place downtown? Brewster's? Tomorrow at 2. "Perfect. And Trevor? Thank you for being civil about this. I know the situation is complicated." After I hung up, I spent the rest of the day preparing. I drove to the nearest city with a decent electronics store and bought a digital recorder small enough to fit in a purse. I also bought a new phone, a smartphone with a good camera and unlimited data plan. That evening, I called Victoria's office number. I knew she'd be working late. She always worked late when she was in the middle of a big project, and stealing someone's husband definitely qualified as a big project. "Victoria Montgomery, how can I help you?" "Victoria, it's Iris. I was hoping we could talk." Her voice immediately became guarded. "What about?" "About the inheritance. About Trevor. I think we need to clear the air." "Iris, I want you to know that Trevor and I know what you and Trevor are," I interrupted. "I'm not calling to fight about it. I'm calling because I want to make sure we can maintain some kind of relationship. You're my only family left." This seemed to surprise her. "You're not angry?" "I'm hurt. But I'm also realistic. Trevor made his choice and you made yours. Fighting about it won't change anything." I put as much resignation in my voice as I could manage. "I just don't want to lose my sister too." "That's actually really mature of you, Iris. I was wondering if maybe we could have lunch this week? Just the two of us. I'd like to hear about your new business partnership with Trevor. And I'd like to tell you about the house. It's actually not as bad as we thought." "Really? Really?" "Grandma apparently had a trust fund that's been maintaining it. It's actually quite charming in a rustic way. We arranged to meet for lunch on Friday at an upscale restaurant downtown. The kind of place Victoria loved because it made her feel important." After I hung up, I sat in my grandmother's living room and planned out the next few days in detail. Trevor would get his meeting tomorrow. Victoria would get hers on Friday. And by the following Monday, both of them would understand exactly what they'd done. But first I had to make sure they gave me everything I needed to bury them both. Brewster's Coffee was busy at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, full of business people grabbing afternoon caffeine and students working on laptops. I chose a table near the back where we could talk privately, and I arrived 10 minutes early to set up my digital recorder and test the audio quality with the background noise. Trevor showed up exactly on time, looking uncomfortable but determined. He dressed carefully, not the casual clothes he usually wore for coffee dates, but not a full business suit either. He was trying to strike a balance between, I respect you enough to dress nicely, and, this isn't a business meeting. You look good, he said as he sat down across from me. The country air must agree with you. Thank you. You look successful. And he did. There was something different about the way he carried himself, a confidence that hadn't been there before. Being wanted by Victoria Montgomery had given him a glow of self-importance that was almost visible. We made small talk while he got his coffee, discussing the logistics of ending our lease and dividing up furniture. I let him take the lead, playing the role of the reasonable ex-wife who just wanted things to be fair and amicable. Iris, he said finally, leaning forward slightly, I need you to know that what happened between Victoria and me, it wasn't planned. I know, I lied, activating the voice recorder in my purse. I mean, we talked before. At family events, you know. But it was always just polite conversation. I never thought of her as anything other than your sister. What changed? Trevor ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd seen thousands of times during our marriage. She started calling me for advice about business things. Marketing strategies, client management, stuff like that. She said she valued my opinion. That must have been flattering. It was. And then she started inviting me to industry events. Networking opportunities that she thought might help my career. You know how she's always been good at that kind of thing. I nodded, encouraging him to continue. We'd have drinks afterwards just to decompress and talk about the people we'd met. She's incredibly insightful about business relationships. She could read people in ways I never could. She's always been good at reading people. Exactly. And she started pointing out things about my career that I'd never considered. Opportunities one was missing, connections I should be making. She made me realize that I'd been thinking too small. He paused to take a sip of his coffee and I could see him weighing how much to tell me. Trevor, I'm not going to judge you for being ambitious. You know that, right? This seemed to relax him. She offered me the partnership about 6 months ago. First I said no. I thought it would be weird working with your sister. But she pointed out that business is business, and that you'd probably be excited about me having such a great opportunity. But you didn't tell me about it. No, I wanted to think it over first. And Victoria suggested that might be wise. She said you'd worry about the transition, about whether I was making the right choice. She thought it would be better to present it to you as a done deal, so you wouldn't stress about something that was ultimately my decision. I had to concentrate to keep my expression neutral. Every word out of his mouth was proving my grandmother's documentation correct. Victoria had been manipulating him so expertly that he still didn't realize it was happening. When did you realize you had feelings for her? Trevor's face reddened slightly. I don't know if I'd call them feelings exactly. It's more like recognition. We understand each other in ways that, well, in ways that you and I never quite did. What do you mean? Victoria sees the world the way I see it. She understands that success requires sacrifice, that sometimes you have to make difficult choices to get what you want. She doesn't take it personally when business has to come first. And I did. You did. Not in a bad way, he added quickly. You have different priorities. You value security and comfort and simple pleasures. There's nothing wrong with that. But Victoria and I both want more. More than what? More than a quiet life in a small apartment with a predictable routine. More than date nights at chain restaurants and vacations to the same beach house every year. More than... He gestured vaguely at me. More than settling. The word hit me like a slap, but I forced myself to stay calm. Is that what you think we were doing? Settling. Weren't we? Be honest. When was the last time you wanted something badly enough to fight for it? When was the last time you took a risk or pushed yourself or tried to become more than you were? I looked at him sitting across from me in his carefully chosen outfit, explaining to me why our 8-year marriage had been a disappointment to him, and I realized that my grandmother had been right about everything. You're probably right, I said softly. I probably was settling. But Trevor, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you really think Victoria wants you for who you are? Or do you think she wants you for what you can do for her? His face immediately became defensive. What do you mean by that? I mean, she's always been very strategic about her relationships. Even as kids, she never made friends just because she liked someone. There was always some benefit involved. That's not fair, Iris. Victoria has worked incredibly hard to get where she is. If she's selective about her relationships, it's because she has to be. People try to use successful people all the time. I'm sure they do. But doesn't it seem convenient that she suddenly became interested in you right when she needed a business partner? Someone with your specific skills and experience. You're making it sound calculated. I'm just asking if you've considered the possibility. Trevor leaned back in his chair, studying my face. You're trying to make me doubt her. I'm trying to make sure you're making this decision with your eyes open. Victoria is brilliant and she's successful and she's beautiful. But she's also someone who sees people as assets. I don't want you to get hurt. The way you got hurt? The way I got hurt. For a moment, something flickered across his face that might have been uncertainty. But then he shook his head firmly. Victoria isn't using me. We're building something together. A real partnership, both business and personal. She sees potential in me that I never even saw in myself. What kind of potential? The kind that can make serious money. The kind that can build an empire instead of just maintaining a comfortable life. His voice grew more animated as he talked. Do you know what Victoria's 5-year plan looks like? She's going to own 3 marketing firms, have offices in 5 cities, and be pulling in 8 figures annually. And she wants me to be part of that. That sounds incredible. It is incredible. And the best part is she doesn't want me to change who I am to fit into her world. She likes my ideas, my perspective, my ambition. I nodded thoughtfully. Trevor, can I tell you something? Something I probably should have told you years ago? Sure. I always knew you were meant for bigger things than what we had. I could see how restless you were, how much you wanted to prove yourself. I just didn't know how to help you get there. This seemed to surprise him. Really? Really? Maybe that's why I didn't fight harder when you told me you were leaving. Part of me knew that you needed something I couldn't give you. Iris. His voice became gentler. You're an amazing person. You're kind and thoughtful, and you deserve someone who appreciates those qualities. Thank you. And you deserve someone who can match your ambition. I leaned forward slightly. I just hope Victoria is really who you think she is. What do you mean? I hesitated, as if deciding whether to say something. Promise me you won't get angry? I promise. I had lunch with Rachel Winters last week. You remember Rachel from your old company? Trevor nodded. Rachel had been his assistant before he'd switched jobs 2 years ago. She mentioned that she'd seen you and Victoria together at that conference in Chicago. The one in March. Okay. Trevor, that was 3 months before Victoria offered you the partnership. And according to Rachel, you two looked very close. Trevor's face went pale. We were just talking business. At a hotel bar at midnight? We'd been at different events all day. It was the only time we could connect. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just pointing out that maybe this relationship developed over a longer timeline than either of you wants to admit. Trevor was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. When he looked up, there was something different in his expression. Even if that's true, he said finally, it doesn't change anything. Maybe we were attracted to each other before we admitted it to ourselves. Maybe the business partnership gave us an excuse to spend time together. So what? The end result is the same. Which is that I'm with someone who understands me. Someone who wants the same things I want. Someone who pushes me to be better instead of accepting me as I am. And there was the admission I'd been waiting for. So you're saying Victoria challenges you in ways I never did? Yes. She makes you want to be more successful? Yes. She's opened doors for you that I never could have opened? Iris, what are you getting at? I reached into my purse and turned off the recording device. I had everything I needed. I'm getting at the fact that you've just confirmed everything I suspected about why you left me for my sister. And I want you to know that I understand now. You do. I do. And I want you to be happy, Trevor. I really do. I stood up and gathered my purse. But I also want you to be careful. Victoria is very good at making people feel like they're special, like they're the only person who really understands her vision. Just make sure you're not confusing being useful with being loved. I left him sitting there looking confused and slightly worried, which was exactly how I wanted him to feel. Friday's lunch with Victoria was at Meridian, the kind of restaurant where entrees cost $50 and the waiters speak in hushed tones about wine pairings. Victoria had chosen it, of course, and she'd arrived early to secure the best table. One with a view of the city skyline that would remind anyone looking at us which sister had made it in the world. She was wearing a new outfit I'd never seen before, a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, paired with jewelry that caught the light every time she moved. She looked like success personified, which was undoubtedly the point. "You look wonderful," she said as I approached the table, standing up to give me a brief hug that smelled of expensive perfume. "Country living really does suit you." "Thank you. You look incredible as always." We ordered drinks. Victoria chose a wine that required consultation with the sommelier, while I stuck with water, and spent the first few minutes discussing the menu and the restaurant's atmosphere. Victoria loved being seen in places like this, loved the subtle performance of being someone important enough to warrant the staff's attention. "So tell me about this house," she said once we'd ordered our food. "You said it wasn't as bad as we'd thought? It's actually quite charming. Grandma had it maintained through some kind of trust fund. All the utilities work, the structure is sound, and there's even internet now." "Internet in the middle of nowhere? Miracles never cease." "It's satellite internet, but it's fast enough for what I need." I took a sip of my water. "Actually, Victoria, there's something I need to tell you about the house. Something I discovered when I was going through Grandma's papers." Her expression became more attentive. Victoria had always been interested in anything that might affect finances or property values. "What kind of something?" "Well, you know how we always thought Grandma was just a retired teacher living on her pension?" "Yeah. Apparently she had some investments we didn't know about. The trust fund isn't just for house maintenance. There's actually quite a bit of money involved." Victoria's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "How much money?" "I'm still figuring that out. But from what I can see, she was much better with finances than we ever realized. The house isn't just a house, Victoria. It's part of a larger estate." "What do you mean?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning. Inside were copies of some of the financial documents I'd found in my grandmother's basement, carefully selected to show significant assets without revealing the full scope of her operation. "Look at this," I said, spreading the papers between our plates. Investment accounts, property holdings, even some kind of consulting business she apparently ran. Victoria studied the documents with the focused intensity of someone evaluating a business opportunity. Her expression grew more interested as she realized the numbers she was seeing. "Iris, some of these accounts show six-figure balances." "I know. And you inherited all of this?" "Apparently. Along with the house." I paused, watching her face carefully. "Victoria, I feel terrible about this." "Terrible? Why?" "'Cause you should have gotten half. We're both her granddaughters. The fact that she left me everything and gave you just the apartment. It doesn't seem fair." Victoria's expression became very still. I could practically see her recalculating everything she thought she knew about our grandmother's estate. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe we should talk about redistributing things. I never expected any of this, and I know you had certain assumptions about how the inheritance would work out." "Assumptions?" "Well, you always said that Grandma clearly favored me. And you were right. But now that I see the full picture, I understand why you might have felt overlooked." Victoria set down her fork and leaned forward slightly. "How much money are we talking about, Iris?" "Total? I'm not sure yet. I'm still finding accounts and documents. But conservatively, probably close to $2 million. The number hit her like a physical blow. I watched her face cycle through surprise, anger, and calculation in the space of about 10 seconds. $2 million. At least. Maybe more. And Grandma left all of it to you. She left all of it to whoever inherited the house. I don't think she expected there to be so much difference in our inheritances." This was of course a complete lie. But it was exactly the kind of lie Victoria would want to believe. The kind that made her feel like she'd been cheated rather than outmaneuvered. "So what are you proposing?" she asked carefully. "I'm proposing that we split everything 50-50, the way it probably should have been from the beginning. You can keep the apartment, I'll keep the house, and we'll divide the financial assets equally. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her business-trained mind clearly working through the implications. That's very generous of you, she said finally. You're my sister. Family is more important than money. But there would need to be legal documentation. Property transfers, account changes, that kind of thing. Of course. I wouldn't expect you to just trust my word. And we'd need to do a complete audit of all the assets before we divide anything. Make sure we have the full picture. Absolutely. I want everything to be fair and transparent. Victoria nodded slowly. When were you thinking we'd start this process? Well, that depends. I know you're busy with your new business venture. Her expression became slightly guarded. Trevor told you about the partnership? He mentioned it. I think it's wonderful that you two found each other. Professionally, I mean. It is just professional, Iris. I want you to know that. I know. Trevor explained the whole situation to me. How you've been helping him network, how the partnership opportunity developed naturally from your professional relationship. I took another sip of water. It's actually very smart business strategy. What do you mean? Well, Trevor has exactly the kind of experience and connections your firm needs to expand. And you have the capital and client base to give him the platform he's been looking for. It's a perfect complementary partnership. Victoria relaxed slightly. Exactly. It's about maximizing our respective strengths. Plus, Trevor is incredibly talented. I always knew he was meant for bigger things than what his old company could offer him. He is talented. Very much so. And I'm sure having someone he can trust completely makes the business side much easier to navigate. It does. Trust is so important in business relationships. You need to know that your partner has your back, that they're not going to take advantage of your vulnerabilities or use your personal information against you. Something flickered in Victoria's expression, but she nodded in agreement. Absolutely. Business partnerships require complete honesty and mutual respect. I'm so glad Trevor has found that with you. He deserves to work with someone who appreciates his value. We finished lunch discussing logistics for the inheritance redistribution, with Victoria insisting on several layers of legal oversight and financial auditing. I agreed to everything she suggested, knowing that none of it would ever actually happen. As we were leaving, Victoria turned to me with an expression that might have been genuine affection. Iris, I want you to know that I really appreciate how you're handling all of this. The inheritance, the situation with Trevor, everything. I know it can't be easy. It's not easy, but it's right. And sometimes doing the right thing is more important than protecting your own feelings. I've always admired that about you. Your sense of fairness. I've always admired your ambition. Maybe we can learn from each other. She smiled. The first genuinely warm smile she'd given me in years. And for a moment I almost felt guilty about what I was planning to do to her. Almost. That weekend I drove back to the house in Millbrook Village and spent 2 days in my grandmother's basement office, preparing for what she had called the distribution. I read through every file, studied every piece of evidence, and familiarized myself with every contact in her network. The computer contained detailed profiles of everyone who would be receiving information. Jonathan Hayes, investigative reporter for the Herald Tribune, who had been trying to expose corruption in city government for 15 years. Agent Sarah Bennett with the FBI's white-collar crime division, who specialized in complex financial fraud cases. District Attorney Michael Gray, who had built his career prosecuting people who thought wealth made them untouchable. Each of them had been waiting years for exactly the kind of evidence my grandmother had collected. They knew she had information, but she'd never given them enough to act on. She'd been waiting for the right moment, the right circumstances, the right motivation. She'd been waiting for someone who had nothing left to lose. I spent Sunday evening customizing the email drafts, adding the recordings I'd made of Trevor and Victoria, and including additional context about their recent actions. By the time I was finished, I had assembled a comprehensive case that would be impossible to ignore or discredit. But before I pulled the trigger on my grandmother's plan, I needed to make one final preparation. I needed to disappear. Monday morning, I drove to the nearest city and opened 3 new bank accounts at different institutions. I transferred my modest savings into these accounts, along with the small amount Trevor and I had shared in joint accounts. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to survive on while the chaos unfolded. Then I went shopping. Not for clothes or furniture but for supplies. Non-perishable food, batteries, a generator, extra fuel for my truck. Everything I'd need to live comfortably at the house without having to venture into town for several weeks. I also bought a new laptop, a portable printer, and several prepaid cell phones. I wasn't paranoid, but I also wasn't naive. Once Victoria realized what was happening, she'd try to retaliate, and I wanted to make sure she couldn't reach me until the dust settled. By Tuesday evening, I was back at the house, completely stocked and ready to begin. I ate dinner by candlelight, not for ambience, but to test my ability to function without modern conveniences if necessary. Then I went down to the basement office and began the final review of my grandmother's plan. Everything was perfect. Every piece of evidence was documented and verified. Every recipient was primed and ready to act. Every timeline was calculated to maximize damage while minimizing Victoria's ability to respond effectively. The only thing left was to decide when to start. I chose Wednesday at 3 a.m. Early enough that most people would see the emails first thing in the morning, late enough that Victoria would be asleep and wouldn't have any warning before her world began to collapse. I set up my laptop at my grandmother's desk, opened the email program, and began loading the prepared messages. 43 emails total, going to journalists, law enforcement officers, prosecutors, regulatory officials, and business competitors. Each one carefully crafted to appeal to the specific interests and motivations of its recipient. At 2:55 a.m. I sat back and looked around the basement office that had become my command center. My grandmother's portrait looked down at me from where I'd moved it to hang above her desk, her expression enigmatic but somehow approving. "This is for both of us, Grandma," I said quietly. At exactly 3 a.m. I clicked send all. I slept until almost noon on Wednesday, which was the most peaceful sleep I'd had in months. When I finally woke up, I made coffee and breakfast, then settled in to monitor the early responses. The first email I received was from Jonathan Hayes at the Herald Tribune, time-stamped at 6:47 a.m. "This is incredible. Are you available for a phone interview this afternoon? We can run this as front page tomorrow if you can verify some additional details. Hayes." The second was from Agent Sarah Bennett, sent at 7:23 a.m. "Ms. Montgomery, the financial documents you've provided require immediate investigation. I'll need to speak with you as soon as possible. Please call my direct line. Bennett." By 2 p.m., I had received responses from 31 of the 43 recipients, all expressing urgent interest in the information I'd provided. Several were already requesting follow-up interviews or additional documentation. But the response I was most interested in came at 3:17 p.m., from Victoria herself. She called my old cell phone number 14 times and left 7 increasingly frantic voicemails. When those went unanswered, she'd apparently gotten my new number from Trevor and tried that as well. Finally, she'd resorted to email. "Iris, I need to talk to you immediately. There are some serious problems with your inheritance situation that require immediate attention. Please call me as soon as you get this message. Do not talk to anyone else about the estate until we can discuss this. Victoria." I deleted the email without responding. By evening, the first news articles were already appearing online. Nothing about Victoria yet. Those stories would take more time to investigate and verify. But several outlets were running pieces about corruption in city planning and irregularities in municipal contracts. The headlines were exactly what my grandmother had predicted. "New evidence suggests systematic corruption in city development projects," and "FBI launches investigation into planning commission contracts." Wednesday evening, Victoria called 17 more times. Thursday morning brought the second wave of articles, and these were bigger. The Herald Tribune ran Jonathan Hayes' investigation as their front-page story. "Multi-million-dollar tax evasion scheme uncovered in local business community." The article didn't mention Victoria by name, but anyone in the business community would recognize the companies and practices being described. More importantly, the article mentioned that federal investigators were already looking into the allegations, which meant Victoria would be hearing from the FBI very soon. Thursday afternoon, my old neighbor called to tell me that there had been some kind of official-looking people at my old apartment building, asking questions about Trevor and me. Federal agents, most likely, doing preliminary interviews as part of their investigation. Thursday evening, Trevor called me for the first time since our coffee meeting. "Iris, what the hell is going on? I'm not sure what you mean. I mean, the FBI showed up at Victoria's office today asking questions about her business practices. I mean, there are reporters calling her clients asking for statements about some kind of investigation. I mean, her accountant called in a panic because the IRS wants to audit 3 years of tax returns. That sounds stressful. Stressful? Iris, they're treating her like she's some kind of criminal. They asked me questions about insider trading and money laundering. They wanted to know about shell companies and offshore accounts. Do shell companies and offshore accounts have something to do with Victoria's business? No, of course not. But they seem to have information suggesting otherwise. Very specific information. What kind of information? The kind that could only come from someone with access to her private files and personal communications. I was quiet for a moment, letting him work through the implications. Trevor, are you suggesting that someone Victoria trusted betrayed her confidence? I'm suggesting that someone is trying to destroy her, and the timing is awfully convenient. Convenient how? Convenient that this is all happening right after she offered to split an inheritance with you. Convenient that you've suddenly become very understanding about our relationship. Convenient that you seem remarkably calm about everything that's happening. I am calm. I found out that the woman who stole my husband has been running a criminal enterprise for years. Why wouldn't I be calm about that getting exposed? She didn't steal me and she's not running a criminal enterprise. Really? Because the FBI seems to think otherwise. Trevor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Smaller. Iris, please. If you know something about what's happening, you need to tell me. She's not handling this well. What do you mean? I mean, she's been awake for 36 hours straight trying to figure out where this information came from. She's convinced that someone has been spying on her, monitoring her communications, maybe even breaking into her apartment. Has someone been doing those things? I don't know. But she's acting like she's under siege. She's not eating, she's not sleeping, she's just pacing around making phone calls to lawyers and accountants and trying to figure out how to stop this. Trevor, if Victoria hasn't done anything wrong, then she has nothing to worry about. The truth will come out. And if she has done things wrong, then she'll face the consequences. Just like anyone else would. Iris, I know you're angry about what happened between us, but... Trevor, I interrupted. I want you to think very carefully about what you're asking me. You want me to help protect someone who systematically destroyed my life as part of a calculated business strategy. Someone who stole my husband because she thought it would be fun to see how much damage she could do to her own sister. Someone who has apparently been breaking federal laws for years. She didn't destroy your life. Didn't she? I lost my husband, my home, my sense of security, and my relationship with my only family member. What would you call that? She gave you an opportunity to build something better. I almost laughed. Is that what she told you? That she was doing me a favor? She said you'd been stuck in a life that was too small for you. She said maybe losing some of the things that were holding you back would help you discover what you were really capable of. And you believed that? I wanted to believe it. Because it made it easier to justify what you were doing? Trevor didn't answer, which was answer enough. Trevor, I need you to understand something. Victoria didn't give me an opportunity. She gave me a motivation. There's a difference. What do you mean? I mean that everything that's happening to her right now is the direct result of choices she made. I didn't create the evidence against her. I just made sure the right people saw it. The line was quiet for so long that I wondered if he'd hung up. You did this, he said finally. I delivered justice. There's a difference. Iris, you need to stop this. Whatever you've set in motion, you need to stop it before it goes too far. I can't stop it, Trevor. It's not mine to stop anymore. It belongs to federal investigators and prosecutors and journalists. It belongs to the legal system. Please. No. I hung up and turned off the phone. Friday morning brought the headlines I'd been waiting for. Local marketing executive under federal investigation for complex fraud scheme. Victoria Montgomery, rising star or criminal mastermind? The fall of a success story. How ambition became corruption. The articles contained everything. The financial fraud, the corporate espionage, the systematic destruction of competitors, the network of corrupt business relationships that stretched across the region. But more than that, They contain the personal details that would destroy her reputation beyond any possibility of recovery. The photos of her with married executives. The recorded conversations about stealing clients and destroying competitors. The evidence of her 2-year campaign to steal Trevor from me as part of a deliberate strategy to eliminate what she saw as competition within our own family. By Friday afternoon, Victoria's business partnership with Trevor had been dissolved. Her clients were terminating their contracts. Her assets were frozen pending federal investigation. Her carefully constructed life was collapsing in real time, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. But the call I was really waiting for came on Friday evening. "You destroyed me." Victoria's voice was barely recognizable. Hoarse from crying or screaming or both. Exhausted from days without sleep. Defeated in ways I'd never heard from her before. "I didn't destroy you, Victoria. I just made sure people could see who you really were. You've been planning this. All of it. The lunch, the inheritance story, the way you acted so understanding about Trevor. It was all a setup." "Yes. How long have you known? About your criminal activities? About your systematic destruction of people's lives? About your 2-year plan to steal my husband just to prove you could?" "I've known since the day I walked into Grandma's house." "Grandma. Grandma spent 30 years documenting everything you did. Every lie, every crime, every time you hurt someone for your own benefit. She was building a case against you, Victoria. She just needed the right person to pull the trigger. And you were that person. I was that person." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Smaller but somehow more dangerous. "You realize what you've done, don't you? You haven't just destroyed me. You've destroyed Trevor too. He's going to lose everything because of his association with me. His career, his reputation, his future. All of it. Trevor made his own choices. He chose you first. For 8 years he chose you. And you're willing to destroy him just to get back at me." For the first time since this whole thing began, I felt a flicker of uncertainty. Not about Victoria. She deserved everything that was happening to her. But Trevor had been manipulated. He'd been stupid and weak and easily influenced, but he hadn't been the architect of his own betrayal. "Trevor will survive this," I said finally. "He's talented and hardworking. He'll find another opportunity. Not after this. Not after being connected to a federal fraud investigation. You know that. Then maybe he should have thought of that before he decided to leave his wife for her criminal sister. Is this really who you want to be, Iris? Someone who destroys people? Is this really who you want to be, Victoria? Someone who plays the victim when her crimes catch up with her? I never pretended to be perfect. I never pretended to be selfless or noble. I wanted success and I was willing to do what it took to get it. But you pretended to be good. You pretended to be kind and forgiving and understanding. And all the while you were planning to destroy everyone who had ever hurt you. I am kind. I am forgiving. I am understanding. But I'm not stupid and I'm not weak and I'm not willing to be a victim anymore. What do you want from me, Iris? An apology? You've got it. I'm sorry I took Trevor. I'm sorry I didn't value our relationship. I'm sorry I treated you like competition instead of family. I don't want an apology, Victoria. I want you to understand what you did. I understand perfectly. I hurt you and now you're hurting me back. An eye for an eye. No. You systematically destroyed my life because you thought it would be entertaining. You stole my husband not because you loved him but because you wanted to prove you could. You treated me like an obstacle to be removed rather than a person with feelings and dreams and value. And now you've done the same thing to me. No, Victoria. I've given you exactly what you earned. There's a difference. The line went quiet and I thought for a moment that she'd hung up. But then I heard her breathing, ragged and desperate. What happens now? She asked finally. Now you face the consequences of your choices. You'll probably go to prison. You'll definitely lose everything you built through crime and manipulation. And you'll have to live with the knowledge that it all could have been avoided if you'd just been a decent person. And you'll get to live with the knowledge that you destroyed your only family member. No, Victoria. I'll get to live with the knowledge that I finally stood up for myself. That I finally refused to be a victim. That I finally fought back against someone who had spent years hurting me and other people. You sound just like me. No. I sound like someone who learned from you. There's a difference. This time she did hang up. 6 months later, I was sitting in my grandmother's living room, watching the sunset through windows that no longer seemed cracked and desperate. The house had undergone what could only be called a transformation. Not through major renovations, but through the simple act of being lived in by someone who saw its potential rather than its problems. I'd had the roof repaired and the plumbing updated. I'd painted the interior walls in warm colors that complemented the original woodwork. I'd planted a garden in the overgrown field, and I'd learned to appreciate the silence that had once felt so intimidating. But more than that, I'd discovered something about myself that I'd never known was there. I was good at being alone. I was good at taking care of myself. I was good at building a life that didn't depend on other people's approval or validation. Victoria had been sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for tax evasion, money laundering, and conspiracy. Trevor had avoided criminal charges, but his career in marketing was over. He'd moved to another state and was working as a sales manager for a small company that had never heard of Victoria Montgomery. He'd called me once, about 3 months after Victoria's sentencing. "I want you to know that I understand now," he'd said. "What she did to you. What she was doing to me. I see it clearly now. I'm glad. I also want you to know that I don't blame you for what happened to her. She made her own choices. She did. But I do blame you for what happened to me." This had surprised me, though perhaps it shouldn't have. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you could have found a way to destroy her without destroying me too. You chose not to. You chose to get involved with a criminal, Trevor. I didn't make that choice for you. You knew what would happen to me when her empire collapsed. You knew I'd lose everything. And you did it anyway." "Yes, I did." "Why?" I'd thought about this question for months, and I'd finally arrived at an answer that satisfied me. Because you needed to learn that actions have consequences. Because you needed to understand that the person you hurt when you left me was a real person with feelings and value, not just an obstacle to your ambition. Because you needed to experience what it felt like to have someone you trusted destroy your life for their own benefit. And now I have. And now you have. Do you feel better? I feel complete. He'd hung up without saying goodbye, and I'd never heard from him again. 2 years after I first walked into my grandmother's house, I was sitting at her desk in the basement office, working on what had become my new career. It turned out that having access to 30 years of investigative files and a network of contacts in law enforcement and journalism was incredibly valuable to people who needed help exposing corruption and fraud. I'd become a private investigator specializing in white-collar crime, helping people who had been victims of the kind of systematic manipulation and abuse that Victoria had practiced. I was good at it, partly because I understood how people like Victoria operated, and partly because I had no tolerance for people who used their power to hurt others. The house had been completely transformed, not just through physical improvements but through purpose. The basement office was now a fully functional investigation center. The library upstairs had become a meeting space where I consulted with clients. The guest bedrooms housed people who needed a safe place to stay while their cases were being resolved. I'd created exactly what my grandmother had envisioned. A sanctuary where people could retreat and plan and become who they were truly meant to be. But the most important transformation had been in myself. I'd learned that kindness didn't mean accepting abuse. I'd learned that forgiveness didn't require allowing people to continue hurting you. I'd learned that there was a difference between being good and being weak, between being understanding and being a victim. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to make sure they face the consequences of their actions. Victoria wrote to me once from prison. The letter was long and filled with reflections on her choices and apologies for the harm she'd caused. She asked if we could correspond, if we could work toward rebuilding our relationship when she was released. I read the letter 3 times, then filed it in a folder marked Closed Cases. Some relationships can't be rebuilt. Some bridges once burned are meant to stay that way. And some people are exactly who they show you they are, regardless of how much you might want them to be someone different. I was sitting in my grandmother's chair, working on a case involving a corrupt city councilman, when I noticed the portrait on the wall above me. My grandmother's expression, which I'd once thought was enigmatic, now seemed clear to me. She wasn't smiling, but she looked satisfied. She looked like someone who had planted seeds and lived to see them grow into exactly what she'd hoped they would become. I understood that feeling now. Outside my windows, the sun was setting over fields that no longer looked abandoned but instead seemed full of possibility. The house that everyone had dismissed as worthless had become the foundation of a life I'd never imagined I could build. My phone buzzed with a text message from a new client, a woman whose business partner had been stealing from their joint accounts for years. Another person who needed someone to help them fight back against someone who thought they were too weak to defend themselves. I smiled as I typed my response, agreeing to meet with her next week. There was something deeply satisfying about using the skills Victoria had forced me to develop: investigation, strategic planning, patience, the ability to see people's true motivations, to help people like the person I used to be. People who had been hurt, betrayed, dismissed, or underestimated. People who deserved better than being victims. I closed my laptop and walked upstairs to make dinner, passing through rooms that now felt like home rather than exile. The kitchen where I'd learned to cook for myself. The living room where I spent evenings reading instead of watching Netflix until I fell asleep. The bedroom where I slept peacefully, no longer wondering if the person next to me was plotting my destruction. As I prepared my meal, I thought about the woman I'd been 2 years ago. Sitting in that lawyer's office, accepting what I thought was the cruel joke of my inheritance. Watching my husband pack his bags while explaining why our 8-year marriage had been a disappointment to him. Driving to this house convinced that my life was over. That woman could never have imagined the person I'd become. Could never have envisioned that her greatest loss would become her greatest strength. Could never have predicted that being abandoned by everyone she thought she loved would teach her how to love herself. I'd learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what you're actually capable of winning. I'd learned that the people who underestimate you often provide you with your greatest opportunities. Most importantly, I'd learned that revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about becoming someone they could never destroy, no matter how hard they tried. As I sat down to eat my dinner alone in my grandmother's house, my house now, I raised my glass of wine in a silent toast. To Rose Montgomery, who had taught me that the best inheritance isn't money or property, but the knowledge of who you really are. To Victoria, who had shown me exactly what I didn't want to become and in doing so had helped me discover exactly what I could become. And to myself for finally learning the difference between being defeated and being transformed. The last laugh, as my grandmother had promised in her letter, always belongs to the dead. But sometimes, if you're very lucky and very patient, you get to have the second to last laugh. And that, I had discovered, was more than enough. Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear in a sky that stretched endlessly over land that belonged to me. Inside, the house settled into its evening quiet, no longer feeling empty but instead feeling complete. I finished my dinner, washed my dishes, and went to bed early. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new people to help, new opportunities to use everything I'd learned about survival and strength and the sweet satisfaction of justice served cold. But tonight, for the first time in years, I fell asleep not wondering what tomorrow would bring, but looking forward to finding out. The woman who had once been someone's consolation prize had finally learned her true worth. And that knowledge, more than any revenge, was the victory that would last the rest of my life.